Hey everybody, Dr. Adam Mathews with Mathews Counseling, and every month we offer resources around mental health and relational health. And this month it is February, and it is Black History Month, and so we are talking about the Black community and mental health, and offering up some resources around that. And today we have Kimberly Knight, one of our fabulous therapists here to talk a little bit about resilience within the Black community, specifically around mental health. And so, Kimberly, I just want to let you kind of start us off and talk about this idea of just the idea of resilience in general. Maybe that's a good place to start. Can you talk to us about the importance of resilience? And then maybe we can talk to how it's applied historically to the Black community. But maybe just start off with like this idea of resilience. It's really important to mental health. Can you just
Mhm.
kind of tell us what it is?
Yes, I think resilience, in my personal opinion, and as a professional, is when you can see a situation and self-reflect and realize how far you've come. And it makes me
Mm.
think therapeutically about the stages of change, where you go through
Yeah.
those five different steps. And once you get to like action stage four or maintenance step stage five, you realize like how far you've really come. And that's your
Yes.
resilience.
Yeah, like that makes me think a lot of like this that idea of reflecting back, like your ability to overcome challenges, your ability to that I like what you said, that ability to bounce back from
Hmm.
really hard times is really what resilience is about, and find a place of equilibrium after that, which I think is really, really hard to do when the
Absolutely.
circumstances and the challenges are really big, right? When they're exceptionally large. So maybe just talk a little bit about kind of how you see resilience applying historically to the Black community, and where that kind of how that affects mental health as well.
Absolutely. So when we think about historically, and I'll preface this with that I've done a lot of historical work on this subject matter. So that's where I'm kind of coming from that
Yeah.
space. But it comes from this fact of thinking even as far back as the transatlantic slave trade, all
Mm.
the way to people coming from the Caribbean islands to here to America, and thinking about the resilience of creating culture and identity here and that culture remaining. And even when you look at Blackness in America now, that resilience still is different in different pockets of places that we see.
Mm.
So I like the fact that there is this history and this content
Yeah.
of culture, identity, and connection of community that comes in, and how people of color, especially Black people in America, have tried to have that resilience that even in the worst of times have tried to make the best of the outcome of the
Yeah.
situation.
I
Hmm.
love that. I think that's like I was talking to one of our other therapists about this on another episode where we were talking about how people that are not a part of the Black community, like myself, that don't have a hard time sometimes fully understanding the effect that slavery had on the Black community even today. Like we can think about it in terms of a horrible event, but it's hard sometimes, like just because I'm disconnected from it every day to know,
Hmm.
oh, this is still something that is affecting folks, let alone the history, the racism and the historical injustices that have come since that time. It's all kind of tied together, and we can't separate that
And
from that it's idea of where resilience is for Black folks today, and where mental health is as well.
absolutely. When you think about the capacity of mental health, that trauma is generational.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's a trait that's been passed down through generations of trauma and challenges with knowing the effects of mental health and how that comes about.
Mhm.
Even when it comes down to how in Black communities children are reared, communication
Mhm.
is done, relationships formulating. These things are traumatic effect due to so many causes that happen due to, unfortunately, enslavement. And I think it's
Yeah.
really important that we acknowledge that even though it seems so far removed, but really isn't, it's one of those things of the resilience of people trying to make
Yeah.
space and have healthy relations and community still shows their resilience of there.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's really important. The other thing that you tie it to in your post note that I wanted to ask you about too is this tying resilience to joy,
Hmm.
right? Like there's that idea of Black joy that comes that like is so ingrained in the community. And from my perspective, I'm tying what I hear you saying anyway is that there's a lot of tie-in to that because I think resilience helps us get back to joy as
Yes.
well. But I'm wondering if you can just speak a little bit to that connection between resilience and joy
Yes,
there.
love that topic. Resilience is the part of where we're going through what we would call in the community the testimony, the challenges
Mm,
that go forward. There it feels like you're going through your test. Your joy is
yeah,
when the testimony comes where you're able to express and self-reflect and say, "Hey, I survived this.
yeah,
I acknowledge this occurred to me, but I am still present and still here, still loving, still passionate,
yeah,
still creative, still wanting to be connected, and knowing that that presence is still there." So that
yeah.
piece that people talk about in cultural writings now of Black joy is that resilience. Hmm.
Yeah, I love that. And you said what like that the connection of just even just I'm still here. I'm still
Yes.
here. I'm on the other side of it.
Hmm.
Not fully even, right? There's
Not
still
fully.
challenges ahead, not
Right.
fully, right?
Right.
But like, but
A
I'm
different
I
layer.
in
Hmm.
different layer, yeah, and I'm still able to push forward. That word
Hmm.
testimony, I think, is important too because that makes me think of faith and church and you mentioned that in your post that that how big a role that has played historically within the Black community, and you make this connection to mental health, which it feels like an apt one. And I may just kind of maybe talk about that for just a second and how that's just woven into that story so that it's hard to separate, right?
Absolutely, because that was a safe space to kind of communicate mental health challenges and a welcoming space, whether it was a space
Yeah.
if you had family members with mental health illnesses that went undiagnosed, if you had mental
Mm,
health challenges yourself, if you were going through some personal issues or challenges through your workplace or systemic racism, the Black church was that safe haven of community, connection, even
yeah.
political power. And I think it's so important to acknowledge that the Black church was that staple of that. And even to this day, still serves that capacity for many people in their Black
Yeah.
community. So, yeah, it definitely ties into where that was a space where people's mental health was definitely being visible and
Did,
seen. Mhm.
Does that hit prevent sometimes seeking out therapists or like because
Yes.
I could see how like you would go if that's where that safe space is, that's where I'm going to go. And if
Mhm.
somebody says, "Oh, you should go see a therapist or you should get further help from a professional," that might be hard, that might be a hard switch. Is that accurate from your standpoint?
Absolutely. And being a therapist, I've seen that. And I've seen taglines on social media like you can have Jesus and a Black, the Black community
Yeah.
church. You can also have that connection of, mental health, have a therapist and have your faith-based practice, whatever that may be. But it's one of those things of that has been such a safe space for so long, and people didn't have access to medical care or insurances that provided support financially for that. That just seemed like an added necessity that honestly could not be paid for at that time. So it was more, now you're looking at it, people are being more open to therapy a little bit more, which
Yeah.
I'm very excited about. But for years on end, you saw people very much staying away from the mental health community because they felt one, representation wasn't there, two,
Mm,
feeling isolated due to mistrust in the medical community, and three, lack of financial access. Of knowing that, oh, you've worked at this company all these years, you actually do have access to these resources.
yeah.
So, financial literacy and educational literacy from that standpoint was also a barrier for a lot of people of color, especially Black folks. So, I really want to hone in on the church was that safe space and still is a representation of that. But I want to encourage people that clinical therapists can be very
Yeah.
supportive in helping you, just like your physical therapist can when it comes to like your medical doctor.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
love that, and I think there's one there's it's so layered, and I think you did a good job kind of outlining all those
Yeah.
layers. The one of the ones that always stands out to me, because I feel like I feel this in much different ways, but that idea of representation,
Hmm.
and how much we talk. There's a lot of talk in culture about representation and in
Yeah.
media and representation in jobs and seeing other people. People that are like you that
Yeah.
share some sort of intersectionality with you in those positions really helps you feel like you can connect or aspire to that. But I don't know that we talk enough about kind of that representation in therapy from the
Hmm.
sense of, and if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, from the sense of I want to see a part of myself
Yes.
represented in my therapist, and when I don't see that, it can be really hard to access therapy, and that's true for my doctors. Like that's true as a gay man. Like I want to go see a gay therapist, like because I feel like they have an understanding of my experience. And
Mhm.
is that true in the Black community? And if so, then that feels like representation becomes a really big thing, and as a way for us on the therapy side of it to really dismantle some obstacles to Black folks getting the help that they need in the mental health world.
Yeah, I've seen it even for myself being a therapist when I'm in midst of community with other Black people, and they'll say, "What do you do for work?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm a mental health therapist." And they're like, "Really?" And it's like then it's
Mm.
like this comfort, this connection here, this idea of like, "Oh, well, you seem really relatable, so I could probably see myself talking to
Yeah,
someone like you." So it's
yeah,
kind of like that idea of, and which is what also one of the factors that made me decide to pursue this career is being even more representation out there and
yes,
also taking away that stigma to mental health, because there's so much of that that has gone on in my community, unfortunately. And I want people to understand there's a very positive support that comes with mental health. And also, something I want people to understand as well is that sometimes a challenge can come in as a barrier if it's in a clinical setting. For some
mm,
people, I've talked to in the community, it's been the idea of like, well, if it's in a hospital setting, I'm seeing a therapist, or a clinic setting, I'm seeing a therapist. That's their only representation thought of what a therapist may be, not thinking of private practice like here,
yeah,
Mathews, where you come and see very nice furniture and cozy
yeah,
couches, or virtually can connect, not
yeah,
thinking that there's other options outside of it looking very clinical based. So that's an
mm,
educational source. I like to also represent that it doesn't have to feel very disconnected. And the third part I'll
yes,
say is when I have clients that share that same ethnic background as I do, it's literally I can see kind of like the barriers coming down faster with building
yeah,
rapport. It's like that's
yeah,
connection of community, just like you say for being a gay man, it's that connection of
yeah.
community of
Yeah,
feeling
that's
that.
almost, it seems like that's what you're describing. It's almost a sigh of relief. Like I can let a piece of my guard down that I can't in other arenas.
Other space.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I haven't made that connection to that clinical piece either, that when it feels that it makes sense that when you're talking about that, there's like the clinical institutions where there have been racist practices and
Right.
where there's medical injustices, like of course, then you're not going to want to go seek out those institutions that feel that clinical because of that, the possibility that that's the case. So yeah, that's really insightful. Um, what's the thing you want people to know? Like as we come up on the end here, like what's the one thing I always like to ask this question so we can just boil it down to one point. What's the thing that you really want people to know about this topic that we've been talking about?
I want people to know that there's a variety of representation of therapists out here that can be supportive to you. And if you are a person that identifies as Black or African American, there's a variety of types. Like I have a very dear close relative that's a mental health therapist, and he has been for a very long time, 15 plus years. But sometimes his therapy is in nature. It's outside.
Mhm.
He's done therapy sessions and enclosed spaces outside where it made more connection for some of the people that he connected with. It can look in various forms. It doesn't have to look very clinical. So I want people to understand it is a clinical practice, but it doesn't have to look traditionally clinical. It can be from the comfort of your home, like how we are right now in virtual
Yeah.
spaces, or it can be in outside spaces like private practices where it feels more connected of community. And I also want people to understand that therapy is a supportive self-care time for you. It is there to be supportive to you, that you don't have to worry about judgments. You don't have to worry about the information being released unconfidentially out to the public.
Yeah.
That is where we have sometimes the challenges in my community because we will share with friends or families or even clergy. And then it gets out, and then people get
Hmm.
very traumatized or upset by that.
Yeah, of course.
Therapy offers a safe, confidential, private space for that work. Yeah. Mhm.
That's wonderful. I think that we kind of also we sometimes assume that people
Mhm.
know about confidentiality, but it's so important to reiterate that because it's such a kind of standard in our field. But I think it's important for people to know that yes, you're legally and ethically
Yes.
your therapist it has to keep what you say confidential.
Correct.
And so that is it is for you, it is a safe space And if somebody doesn't make it a safe space, then you need to find a different therapist. But that is the idea that we all, I think, aim for. So, Kimberly, thank you so much. I could talk to you for a really long time
Yeah.
about this topic because I've already learned so much from you in just this short amount of time. But I appreciate your time. If you are looking for a therapist, if you want to explore a therapist, even if it's your first time and you're setting foot into it for the very first time, we do try to make that first step the easiest. And we do try to make sure that there is a therapist that shares some part of your identity, from a racial standpoint, a sexuality standpoint, an ethnic standpoint, um, um, on from gender, everything that we can we try our best to make sure that there's somebody for everybody. And you can check out our therapist at mathewscounseling.net/therapist. And there is we have somebody that's dedicated to finding the right therapist, the right fit for you. Our therapists like Kimberly have openings that work for you on online and in person in our two offices. So Kimberly, thanks again. And we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.